Welcome to the RevOps Lab, a podcast exploring the art and science of revenue operations. To find more episodes and resources on scaling your revenue engine, visit getweflow.com/RevOps.
Hey, Yannis.
Hey, Philip. So what are we talking about in today's episode?
Today, we are taking you on a journey to create the RevOps tech stack. From spreadsheets, CRM to data warehouse, Chris shares many best practices and which pitfalls to avoid. We hope you enjoy our conversation with Chris Mackinnon from Zeotap. Chris, great to have you. Welcome on the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, and today we'll talk all about tooling. I mean, I think we all agree that, tooling follows process, and, we take you on a journey to talk about, the evolution of tooling if we were to set up a new company and then essentially scale that into the growth stage where Zeotap currently is. So all things from nothing to data warehouse. So Chris, over to you. I'd love to understand, if there's nothing, right? Like, how would you start the tooling evolution of the go-to-market team?
Yeah, it's super difficult, right? I mean, back in 2010, when I first started this, there were a limited amount of tools that that were out in the market and you needed. And now I feel like every day, almost 20 to 25 emails of completely distinct tools across 40 different categories of tools, and knowing what to implement and when is extremely difficult. So I think it's super important that that people have a plan in mind when they start out. And I think really one of the biggest things I've learned is to keep it simple. Right? It can be very overwhelming, and you can hear everybody in the market telling you need this is the ROI, this is the benefit that you're going to bring. Without this, you're not going to achieve your revenue goals or your conversion goals or whatever it may be. But the reality is, when you first start out, I think you can do most of it in Google Sheets. That's the honest truth. I think the first... Google Sheets or Excel, whatever takes your fancy. I think the first 6 months to a year, really, you're looking at getting your first few logos in the door. You're looking at getting an MVP built and starting to figure out what that product market fit looks like. And if you start trying to implement CRM systems and sales automation systems or marketing automation systems, then all of a sudden your focus changes quite drastically. You spend a lot of time trying to set these things up and maintain them and get it all right, and not enough time going out and getting these logos. And all you need is a simple Google Sheet that just says, what's the account you've spoken to, what's the next step with them, what's the potential value, and when do you think it's going to close. Much more than that, you don't really need to begin with, because it's typically, as you guys will know, I think better than a lot of people, it's founder-led. So you guys having conversations out with the market, and maintaining your own pipeline, or maybe one or two salespeople of trust who don't need, a Salesforce, a HubSpot, or whatever it may be, in order to go and manage that. And is that, what do you think about that? Is that how you managed it to begin with? Did you go down the let's put Salesforce in from day one route?
Well, as you know, we're building a product for Salesforce to make it easier to update Salesforce and then, run deal inspection and forecasting. And so we actually implemented Salesforce from the get-go, but I think it's not a typical approach, right? I think I'm a big fan of eat your own, dog food. And so using our product day to day helps you build a better product. But I don't think that's the typical recommendation I'd give a startup founder when being below 10 people or so. So I fully agree. I think what you just basically outlined is a very simple version of a CRM, right? I'm curious, like, let's assume we grow to 10, 15 reps, right? Like, how do you put more structure in place? How would you go about it?
Right. So I would call that probably year two in a fairly high growth company, 10, 15 sales reps. Like you said previously, process comes first. You've got to make sure your ICP is defined. You've got to make sure that you have some kind of sales process. You've got to make sure you understand what your territories look like and where you're focusing. But then really, in order to support that, I think the first piece of software that you need to implement is a CRM system, because that is when you're going to start getting to the point where you've got a lot of pipeline, a lot of engagement with the market, a lot of outbound going on, and you need to be able to understand not just what's going on, but what is working and what isn't working. And that becomes a lot easier once you've got as I like to call it, a system of record, which is a CRM system, in order to track that in a standardized way. Now, a lot of companies will go straight to a Salesforce and then customize the life out of it. And this is something I've seen all over the place, whether they go into HubSpot or Salesforce or Pipedrive. Every company seems to try and reinvent the wheel when it comes to pipeline management, sales management, go and customize the life out of a CRM system, and then end up in this spiral of problems and challenges as they grow, because ultimately every customization ends up in dependencies, right? So if you're customizing how you're going to go about forecasting, then all of a sudden within different fields, then all of a sudden the Salesforce or HubSpot forecast tool isn't going to work for you. And whatever other forecast tool you implement isn't going to work. And then all your reporting needs to change outside the standard reports and outside the standard dashboards. And it just rolls on and on and on the bigger you get and the more customization you do. So I'd say implement a CRM system, but take advantage of the billions and billions of dollars of research and development that a HubSpot, a Salesforce, a Pipedrive, whomever else is in the market is doing behind the scenes, and follow standard processes, follow best practices. There will be, I would say, configurations that will be specific to you, right? Are you looking at certain industries, certain size of companies? How do you size companies? Is it based on employees? Is it based on revenue? Is it based on ad spend? Is it based on whatever other metric you might have in your given market? But don't go and try and customize the life out of it to the point where, you're fitting the system into your processes instead of fitting your processes into the system. So I think that was my biggest learning, at least from having implemented and worked with multiple implementations of CRM systems. Is the more customization, the more problems down the line. So yeah, I would keep that pretty standard, but CRM gives you the ability to obviously track and understand what's going on, what engagement's happening with your prospects, what engagement's happening with your addressable market, see where you're finding results, where are you generating opportunities, where are you not generating opportunities. That and then help you refine your ICP and feeds back around into generating more revenue at the end of the day. And then as you're growing and you've got more deals coming in, you can start understanding your conversion rates by source, your conversion rate by people, by territory, etc. Your win rate, your ACB, what your sales velocity is, all of these fantastic KPIs. But again, the base of it is getting the right system with the right structure in place in order to do that. And then depending on the type of business that you work in, depends on which order you would then go about looking at things, right? I have worked in many enterprise companies that focus on the enterprise segment, and that typically means very high average ACVs, not small but longer sales cycles, which means that the first couple of years you are maybe doing 5 million ARR from 3 companies, in which case your win rate and your average deal size and your sales cycle is, you can literally calculate that on a napkin in your head. You don't need a Tableau or a data warehouse in order to go and figure that out, right? You just go, oh yeah, we sold these 3 companies, these 3 deals last year. This is our average. So you don't need to look at it on a regular basis. Then you can focus on other things. Then it's more important to understand what your pipeline looks like and how does that look with conversion metrics, right? With your conversion metrics.
I just quickly, so I think I fully agree, that actually before you even can start customizing your CRM, whatever you choose as a tool, you actually need to understand how the business works. And you need to have a certain number of volume, you need to have some volume there, you need to have a certain number of leads. And typically in the first couple of months, or probably the first couple of years really, you're also adding a lot of new products, or you're changing the setup of your sales team. So meaning that in worst case, every 6 months, all the data you collected prior basically becomes invalid and you have to start from scratch. So what's even like the value of like trying to automate and improve the data collection there, to an extent, until at least like you found sort of like the product market fit. At least that I think you need to have found before you can actually really customize a CRM. So one thing I'm wondering there in terms of your perspective on this is there's also a lot of like marketing tools, and marketing is much more important in the beginning than, like a good CRM, I think, that also have a CRM component in them. Like, I mean, HubSpot essentially that's how it became also a sales CRM nowadays. And ActiveCampaign, Intercom, right? All of these tools, they also have this CRM component in there. Like, do you think that's a viable, way to go? Or is that something where you're like, oh no, that's something I wouldn't do?
I mean, I think they're fantastic tools. And I think there's a lot of benefits you get from having both the kind of marketing automation and the sales system of record in one tool. And actually it's a challenge that I've seen multiple businesses now is having HubSpot as a marketing system, Salesforce as a system of record and a sales management system, and then the whole marketing attribution challenge around it. Because those two, while they synchronize, they don't synchronize campaigns. They don't synchronize, right? Which is one of the fundamental things stored in order to understand marketing attribution. That they don't. They're made not to synchronize to the point where they can work in harmony. They're made to synchronize enough to provide you with what you need at a base level. Right? I think that's always the game, because Salesforce want to sell you marketing automation and their marketing cloud or Pardot or whatever it's called nowadays. And HubSpot want you to go and use HubSpot as a whole for a CRM and marketing system. But I think if you're a year, 2 years into starting a business, you've got 10, 15 people, HubSpot should be more than sufficient and actually should be extremely good for you as both the CRM and a marketing automation tool. Again, this comes back to people overcomplicating implementations of CRM systems. People often think they need something more complex than HubSpot because they have multiple territories and they need 10 different pipelines that they look at in different ways. And actually, you don't, right? If you really boil it down to the day-to-day, you don't need that much complexity. So putting everything into HubSpot and using their reporting tool, and as we all do, exporting data into Google Sheets or into Excel, which is super easy from any tool nowadays, is more than enough at that point. And you get the added benefit of having all of the marketing automation in there. So your nurture flows and your workflows, you can link it up to LinkedIn ads, Google ads into your website and get feeds of activity across your website. Actually, I'm a big fan of HubSpot. When I first joined Zeotap, I wish they'd have stuck with HubSpot instead of implementing Salesforce, because I don't think it was the right time to implement Salesforce. Right. Now we've grown. I think we're at that point now because we've integrated a lot of other things. We've also got support who we support through RevOps from a Salesforce administration point of view, and various other teams with a couple of customized objects specific for them. But yeah, I think HubSpot's a fantastic tool, and there are a lot of others out in the market that I personally don't have experience with. Hence why I keep talking about HubSpot. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for it. You get a lot of inbuilt analytics. They've grown a lot in the last 5-10 years. So people should definitely go back and look at it and really consider how much they need what I would class as an enterprise grade CRM and marketing automation system compared to more of a growth CRM and marketing automation system, which I would say HubSpot is.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're seeing this across the board, right? Like typically in SaaS or technology companies, most companies start with HubSpot as marketing automation, and then either start with a CRM, right? Like, and that typically is either HubSpot CRM or Salesforce for different reasons. I mean, I think we could, cut another episode about HubSpot versus Salesforce and the differences. It's a big topic and it's very important, right? Because in our minds, CRMs are infrastructure, right? And you anyways need various different tools on top of them that are specialized in creating better experiences. I mean, if you were to now grow to 50, maybe 100 people, you have an SDR team, you have an AA team, CSM team, right? Let's pull this a bit further. Like, what would you add? I mean, I think we have CRM, we have marketing automation. What else are you thinking of in terms of categories? How would you further grow this stack?
I mean, like I said earlier, there are hundreds of different categories, right? I was doing a little bit of prep last night, thinking about it, and I started writing a list, and every other minute something else came to mind. Oh, I forgot about that. Oh, this content management, things that and you start thinking about marketing tooling, and then you start thinking about customer success tooling, and right, obviously RevOps being horizontal across sales, account management, customer success, marketing. We also hold partner. Here we do a lot of work with solutions engineers and implementation as well, because it all ties into the customer journey at the end of the day. Helps us make more revenues, make more money and save more money at the end of the day is my the RevOps team motto.
It's a great definition, by the way. Make more money, save money.
Make more money, save more money. It's as simple as that. If I do that, then I'm doing my job well. That's how I think of it. But I think it really depends on your business, right? If you are in a, let's say, a high volume, low value SaaS business where it's, get them on from a free trial and then convert them, and that happens, then you want to be looking at something like a intercom. You want to be looking at analytics for the website and for the platform in order to understand where people are going, where are they getting value. You want to look at tools, some kind of analysis tools to understand what the customer is using in order to then feed that back into your marketing, right? If you can understand where you're getting the most benefit, where your clients are getting the most benefit from, then you can double down on that from a marketing point of view, increase your conversion rates through that. If you're working in more of a, say, a growth or an enterprise space where it's a higher ACV, lower volume of deals coming in, and you've got an outbound team, or you will need an outbound team or an inbound qualification team, then you probably want to be looking at something like a sales execution system, so an Apollo, Salesloft, and Outreach, right? Which obviously synchronizing with Salesforce, and Salesforce being the system of record, it pushing everything back into there, but allowing your team to start having a little bit more of a structured outreach to the market and follow up of both the leads that are coming in and of the kind of intent that we're detecting in the market as well. So again, there's a million and one things you can do with a Salesloft and an Outreach, an Apollo, right? I mean, everything from cadences and simply setting up email cadences to multi-touch, multi-tool engagements where you're going through emails, phone calls, LinkedIn, events, whatever else it might be, ads, right? All the way to conversation intelligence and meeting analysis, where it will record you and understand what keywords and buzzwords have been used. And if the client says pricing, then all of a sudden there's 15 people in your company that get an email saying, hey, this person just said the word pricing. Now we should be really interested. There's a lot of stuff that it can do. A lot of internal dangers with it as well, depending on how you have it set up. So, I mean, that's where we went. We've had both Outreach and Salesloft in-house. So I've worked with both of those in the past. I've worked with Apollo in the past as well. And they're great tools. They provide increased efficiency for your inbound qualification or your outbound BDRs, SDRs, digital, inside sales, whatever acronym you might want to use for them. They provide increased efficiency and increased visibility, right? And essentially the way I measure it, at least in-house, is we segment our data using whatever segmentation makes sense for you. We use very simple revenue, industry, geography. We don't need anything more than that right now. And we will refine that as we go. But right now we segment our data like that. So we have then key accounts, which are, hand-picked key accounts, tier 1, 2, and 3. Super simple, no crazy naming conventions. And what I look at is what is our engagement across those different tiers in a few different from a few different perspectives. So the first thing I want to know is how many opportunities do we have? Right? What's the percentage of accounts in a given tier that we have opportunities with? Then what's the percentage of accounts in a given tier that we've had meetings with? And what's the percentage of accounts in a given tier that we have engaged with in some way in the past 6 months? Right? And that looks then essentially a coverage model. So it tells me, hey, if we've got no opportunities, but we're having loads of meetings, then we've got a problem. If we're having loads of engagement and no meetings, then we've got a problem with our messaging, or there's just no demand in the market for it, or we're in the wrong markets, and you can start digging into those things.
Yeah, I really love this meeting part, because I think there's a lot, the old world measures everything in MQLs, right? And I think that is often a very interesting kind of fuzzy metric. And I think essentially it's about the first, especially in enterprise, right? It's about the first meeting, and then obviously all the follow-on meetings from there. So I really like that, kind of simplicity of just looking at, okay, meetings, opportunities, and the territories to, and against a named account list, right? To understand, okay, how well are you doing? Because these are the things that actually move the needle. There's somebody just downloading a gated content piece, probably not being, really deep down in the awareness funnel.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then nowadays you have these funnels have let's say evolved from, let's say, a tofu, mofu, bofu model in the past, and now we're talking about demand creation, demand capture, and demand conversion, which is basically the same thing with a different set of acronyms tied to it, right? But ultimately, what's important to me is are we having meetings with people, right? MQLs are great, but once we're talking to people, that's when we can actually start understanding why things are converting, why things are not converting, because we can get contextual feedback on it. The MQL part we obviously look at, it exists, but at the end of the day, in year 2, 3 of a SaaS company at least, and the SaaS companies I've worked in, you're not talking about hundreds of thousands of MQLs, and the quality of those MQLs you can measure quite easily to understand, right, how many of them just get flat out rejected and how many of them get through. Then you can continue tweaking and understand where they're coming from, and go back up the funnel to say, okay, look, this particular source doesn't provide MQLs that convert, or these MQLs convert at X rate, 5%, and these MQLs convert at 15%. But in the world that I've worked in, at least, we're talking for the first few years about quite low volumes. Therefore, your sample size is a little bit skewed. You tend to end up doing a lot of events, which naturally have really high conversion rates and don't necessarily provide MQLs. They go straight into SQL, SAL, whatever we want to call it, straight to meeting, or a pre-pipe opportunity, right? A stage 0 opportunity, depending on the conversation that's been had. So then that takes out a whole chunk of analysis that you can do to say, okay, these guys, how did they get to that event? Well, they go every year. It's nothing to do with our marketing.
Stage 0 opportunity. There's another one.
There's another thing.
A big debate.
We can, that's an internal debate that I'm having, not with myself and with the company as well right now, because one of the first things I did when I joined Zeotap was actually remove stage 0. And we've gone back to put it in place again in the last couple of months. So, no matter how much experience you have, you're always learning. You never get everything right. I think we've implemented it with a difference this time. We've been very strict on what a stage 0 looks like. Historically, it was just a dumping ground where basically we went, oh, that account could be a good client for us, put it in stage 0. Which then ended up just with a gigantic kind of lake of account names sat in stage 0 opportunities with nobody doing anything on them, and nobody assigned to them, nobody taking ownership of them. So we've gone back and revisited it, and now we have very clear separation. The minute it goes into a stage 0, it's owned by the account executive or the partner manager, and they're the ones accountable for moving that forwards. And we have pipeline reviews on those as well, which make sure things are actually moving. And I'm extremely strict in terms of telling people, right, let's get rid of that. Let's push that back to a BDR and see if we can get another meeting with them and see where it goes from there.
Just one step back, I think would be super interesting just to kind of like, give our listeners a perspective on how RevOps works at Zeotap, because I think that definitely also like shapes this conversation a little bit. Like the way you talk about it is analytics is also part of revenue operations. Is that correct? Like, so do you have like your own like data science people, or like how do you cover that part? Because I think that is also its own category that we have not talked about so much about yet. Is that fully taken care of? Is there even like a MarOps team or like a data science team at Zeotap, or is this all RevOps?
That's a good question. So I have a team of 3, and so that consists of a RevOps manager, my guy Rayson, who is fantastic systems admin. You guys know him. He's done all the work on Weflow, which I will talk about in a little while as well, because it's a big part of our tech stack. We've got Alexandra, who heads up operations for the business, and then we've got a RevOps coordinator, Ashrit, who deals with everything from helping manage our QBRs to building our playbooks to updating our master slide decks. And as a team, we hold the responsibility for BI, data analytics, for all of the go-to-market side of things, processes, strategy, reporting, dashboarding, education enablement, compensation plans, and all of those other fun things that you have to deal with, as well as tools for buying, implementation, maintenance, and evolution. So it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot across 2 business units. We have both a SaaS business unit and a transactional data business unit within Zeotap. So we have 2 different go-to-market functions, to essentially 2 different businesses, both working in Salesforce, both using Tableau for reporting, both using our data warehouse. So we're kind of managing it. We're managing it. Let's put it that way.
I think it's super interesting because, like, to some extent, you could also argue, right? Like, you buy all these tools, you put all these tools together. Sometimes also hiring a person can just mean replacing a couple of tools, or like 1 or 2 tools, depends, right? You always have to kind of like weigh the cost against each other, but like a very common reason of like, or like argument, like a SaaS solution will give you is like, oh, if you buy our tool, you'll save X amount of hours every month. And this means you need like 2 people less in headcount. And that's why spending like $200K on us per year is totally fine.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I got so many examples of where I've joined a business and there has been a tool that's been implemented or paid for where I have replaced it or removed it as soon as possible. I'm not going to name any company's names, right? I don't think it's necessarily, I don't think any of those tools were bad tools. I think they were purchased at the wrong time, right? So a great example of that is that we had an enterprise-grade content management system implemented to an extent. We've signed up for a 3-year contract, and it was a tool that we had 0 adoption on. We didn't have enough content to really need a content management system. It was almost a full-time job to maintain and keep updated with everything that was being created or was being changed, and ultimately was more complex than just using Google Slides and Google Docs, which the team just continued to do regardless of how you train them. So we ended up using that as our internal playbook system, where we would just write out our playbook. We'd have our sales process, our sales methodology. We'd have discovery questions and links to all of the training sessions that we do on a weekly basis, links to every other piece of content and internal and external that we had. And we basically used it like I will be using Confluence when we replace it, because Confluence does just that. And it comes built in with Jira, and we have it in-house. It's simpler to use. Everybody knows it. It just looks like a simple web page. So we're going to be moving across to that. But it's a great example of where we have spent a decent amount of money on a tool that wouldn't have been required until probably 4 years, 5 years into the future, I would say.
Yeah, I love this description of when is the right time to buy a tool. What else are you looking at if you think about your tech stack? I mean, any other things that you're using? No.
Yeah. I mean, let's say there's 1,000,000,001 things. There are things that I would like that internally, let's say, they're not a number one priority, right? So things like compensation management systems. That's a tool that I think is super important for a scaling business to have. Selfishly, because it's going to save me loads of time in doing calculations on a deal by deal basis. But a team of 60 plus go-to-market members. But the benefit to the business is that each individual would get their visibility of what their potential earnings are on a given deal on a live basis, right? Which I currently have to do manually. I'll have a meeting with people, I'll tell them, I'll send them emails, and I'll send all those update emails at the end of the month and tell people this is your earnings, and make sure everything's calculated right. Spend several days trying to get it all perfect in order to do it. But then it's a balance right now of how much time are we going to spend to implement and maintain that tool, right? If it takes me 2 days a month, even 2 full days a month, which most months it doesn't, 2 full days a month, then we're talking about 24 days a year, right? If we're gonna implement a tool and then train everybody on it, it's gonna take me probably that long, if not longer, over the course of a year in order to build in each of the individual models, check each of them work correctly. Then halfway through the year, we might decide we're going to change the compensation structure for a couple of teams, because that's what happens sometimes. Right? I try to avoid it as much as possible, but it happens, right? Business grows and changes and team structures change. So then you've got to change those models, and you'll probably have to pay for that, or you're going to have to wait for their customer success team to help you out, or figure it out by trial and error. And then all of a sudden, you've spent more time and effort than just building it in Google Sheets, right? And just taking the time to do it, or getting a working student or a coordinator to help you out and go, okay, look, I've done calculations. I need you to send these emails out to people. So again, comes back to, figuring out what the real return on investment is and being really honest with yourself about the benefit that it's going to bring to the business. But I think I only really learned that through making those mistakes in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's a great way of looking at it, right? Like, how much time do you actually spend? How do you drive adoption? How do you make sure that it's really like a strong ROI versus just a nice to have, right? I think these are all questions that are fundamentally important, especially, with the move to kind of being more efficient in a different funding environment. Yeah, I mean, so now, I mean, we have a bunch of tools, right? So we have CRM, marketing automation, prospecting outbound, you mentioned CDP, right? Product analytics, business intelligence, obviously they all and always loved G Sheets and Excel. Anything else that you do that is worth noting here?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Actually, it's your tool. Weflow, and I can explain exactly why. All right, and to the audience that are listening, I've been a client of Weflow's now for coming up to 12 months. Actually, I think our renewal's due, so we should probably talk about that after the podcast has fantastic success.
This is not scripted. This is not scripted, by the way. Just want to put it out there.
Hey, competitors, here you go.
they've got no chance. Don't worry.
The launch of this episode is delayed by at least until the negotiations are done.
But no, I mean, Weflow, honestly, is something that I've been looking for quite a while. I didn't know I was looking for exactly that, but I knew I wanted a lot of the functionality that you can provide within a tool for many, many years now. I think the two main things that it's driven for us from a return on investment point of view is one, massively increased efficiency in the entry of data for our sales team, and therefore adoption of our CRM. Right, Weflow sits obviously on top of our Salesforce, reads the data out of the API, and provides a phenomenal way of us, both as managers and as individual contributors, incorporating insights and data into our CRM in a really fluid, quick way. Right, so an increased adoption of our CRM gave us much better data quality and gives us much better understanding about pipeline and the ability to manage that pipeline. And then I think this is a kind of a byproduct of that, and kind of part of the forecasting side of what you do is much better forecasting, right? Because we've got better clarity and quality of data in there, and more say recency and accuracy in our data, we've got much better forecasting now than we have done since I began at the business, right? And it continues to improve month over month as we tweak and enhance the process. Now, there is a forecasting module as well that you guys will know well, and I'm looking to move the team into using that more and more. I look at it on a regular basis, and that's going to give us the ability to not just look at what our forecast is, but what it was, and see what's come in, what's come out, look at the pacing of it, look at net new opportunities, changes to amount, changes to close date, and then really have that granular understanding of what's going on. So I'm super excited about implementing that. But I think that's, just to summarize, because I know this is not an advert, but just to summarize the benefit that we've truly had out of it, is I've never seen a team adopt a Salesforce system outside of a big enterprise where it is kind of structured and trained from day one and standardized as part of the business. In startups and scale-ups, I've never seen Salesforce adopted like it has been here through the use of Weflow. So that's been absolutely phenomenal.
And just curious, from your perspective, when do you think would be a good time to implement a tool like Weflow?
I mean, that really depends on the kind of people that you've got in the business, the speed at which your business is growing. I don't think it can ever be too early, to be honest, because I think it would, if you could implement it alongside Salesforce, then you're creating an integrated system and an integrated process then, right? Where you say to the account executive, look, this is where you go, update your information. This is how you add new information, and all through Weflow. And then you have all the kind of dashboard side of it and the system of record in Salesforce, where your managers can go and look at the dashboards, for example, or you can then push it out into a data warehouse. So if you can do it right from the beginning, I think it'd be great, because then you don't have to go and implement a set of processes and enable everybody and try and drive adoption in Salesforce, and then a year and a half later, then change all of that and try and drive it all through Weflow. I think consistency when it comes to that kind of thing is key. The more consistent you can be with your team, the better. The more changes you make, the more challenges to adoption you will have, because people either get used to one way and they really like doing it like that and they don't want to change, or they just don't remember, right? I mean, the amount of times we've changed something and people just don't remember. No matter how many times you tell people have got jobs to do, they've got other things going on. They can't retain all the information that you give them. And if you're changing something every 2 days or every 2 weeks, they're just not going to remember. And then you, as a RevOps function, just going to be behind them all the time, or behind their manager all the time, trying to catch up with it. I think as early as possible is the short answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason we even started this company was that we run into so many situations where the data in Salesforce was pretty poor for various reasons, mostly around adoption and utilization. If you wanted to operationalize sales methodologies, was super difficult. And then, you roll that up and try to understand where are risks within your pipeline, how are opportunities developing throughout the time, right? Like something pretty hard to do because Salesforce isn't necessarily very good at historic data snapshots, and then essentially rolling that up into a structured forecasting process where you can compare your bottom-up submissions with your prediction quotas, right? Like and essentially also like a predicted range, and so I think it is one other category. I mean, I think you mentioned another category while talking, and maybe that's the last one, but I know you're doing some interesting stuff there as well. So assuming that this data problem in Salesforce is solved by, better guiding, but also automating the activity capture, which I know you're also doing with our email capture, but then also other tools, right? Like I'm super curious, like what you do on the data warehouse side, implementing various different, solutions, finance, CRM, maybe production systems. How do you look at that?
Yeah. The never-ending question of like, how do you build a data warehouse? If you do build it, where do you build it? How do you build it? Who owns it? Do you have a data engineering team? Is it RevOps? Is it product? Do you go direct from your product to Salesforce? I mean, I'm a big fan of creating a centralized data warehouse. It's what we've done here. We use BigQuery. We're one of the biggest Google partners in Europe, and we will continue to be, and it's a fantastic tool. So we use BigQuery. We replicate multiple tables using a tool called Workato, which is like an enterprise-grade Zapier. Allows you to do kind of big batch and insert update queries. It's hugely functional. So we use that in order to replicate multiple core tables from Salesforce, core tables from NetSuite, and then we have our product team who are fantastic and have written a bunch of stuff that I don't understand in order to pull in and replicate tables into our data warehouse from the back end of our product. Now, that's all well and good, having all of that data in individual data sets and tables in there. The challenge that I knew was coming before we even started it was stitching this data together. Right? We've got a product team who've built a great product, and we have, say, multiple orgs within our product per client. They can have, say, let's give the example of a production and a sandbox. So each client can have a production, a sandbox, or as many sandboxes as they want. Now and in Salesforce, that's one client. So there we've got a many-to-one relationship there. In Salesforce, that might be multiple clients within a group. So you might take, not a client, but let's take Coca-Cola as a company. You might have Coca-Cola UK, Spain, Germany, who you want to roll them all up and consolidate them into a group. And each of those have 4 different orgs in our product. And then you've got, say, 3 or 4 different billing accounts in our NetSuite as well, right? Because you've got, let's say 4, because you've got 3, which is each of the Coca-Colas. And then halfway through a year, one of the Coca-Colas decides they actually want to be billed through another entity or through their agency. And therefore you have 4 billing accounts attached to 3 accounts in Salesforce attached to 15 orgs in our production environment. So how do you find a way of stitching all that together? It was the biggest challenge that we faced when we began. What we did was essentially, I always like to build things from the most granular level possible so that we can then roll it up and pivot it in whichever way you want, right? If I start at group level, then it'll only ever be data at group level, and we'll have to go and redo the same process later. So we sat down and we came up with a structured, essentially an ID strategy. We said, okay, these orgs map to one account in Salesforce. So then we've got the account ID in Salesforce as one of our IDs. We have a mapping table for now that will cover that off. In the future, that will have to go into the kind of back end of our production environment, so we can add that code in, that customer code or account ID, whenever we create a new organization. And in the future, we can automate that kind of thing with Workato as well, in order to auto-generate orgs and therefore add the ID in. Then we need to take a customer ID from those accounts and assign them to NetSuite into each of the orgs. So you might have 2 orgs with the same customer ID in NetSuite, linking to 1 org with the same customer ID in Salesforce, linking to 5 orgs with the same customer ID in our back office. And that way we have an ID strategy that allows us to link our data. So now, in order to do that, it was very manual. We sat and we a bunch of us took a section of a Google spreadsheet and we sat and went through manually. We assigned all the orgs customer IDs in Salesforce, all the accounts customer IDs in Salesforce. And then we sat and manually went through our orgs and manually went through our NetSuite and just typed it in. Because there was no way of joining them up. And we could have gone all fancy and tried to do a whole bunch of VLOOKUPs using certain parts of account names and fluffy matching and all these kind of things. But it just, I sat with a beer on a Friday night on the sofa and just got on with it. It was a lot more efficient doing that than it was trying to figure out some kind of systematized, automated way of doing it. And now we've done it. It's part of our deal desk process and our implementation process in order to maintain it. And we also have various validations and checks in place that say, hey, show me any orgs that come in that don't have a customer ID. And now we have all that in the data warehouse. It's super easy to do that. And we can set that Tableau dashboard so that to have kind of a data health dashboard, so to speak, kind of RevOps check dashboard. So now we've done that. We're building out our base queries. And I'm a firm believer in whether you're looking at reports in Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever it is, I've always started by creating one base report that has the standard filters that you need on there. And then if anybody needs a customized report, you take that base report and you work off that. Because the amount of times I've given a report to somebody, whether it's an MD of a company, a board member, a colleague, whomever it might be, and I've given them the formatted report with the data they need, and then the next day they've come back and said, Chris, the data's all wrong. I said, can't be the case, it was right yesterday. And you go in and they show you and you go, well, you deleted a bunch of things, or you filtered a bunch of things. Like you don't know what you're filtering. Why are you filtering it? So if you start with that base report, that doesn't get rid of the risk, but it reduces the risk of them being able to filter things that they don't necessarily need to be filtered, right? Or unfiltered things, or whatever it might be. So we start with that, and then from there we can extrapolate out and build everything else that we need.
So it feels like we could continue talking for another, 45 minutes here, but I think we're actually 15 minutes over our usual recording time. I think this was extremely insightful. And yeah, I'd love to maybe find more time to talk about, all things data warehouse, because I think it's a very interesting topic. Not just how to set it up, but also what actually do you do with it, right? Like it's a big investment to get it done, but then why do you actually do it? What's the purpose of it? So maybe doing a deep dive one day could be really interesting for the audience. I'd love to, close this with, our typical closing question. So if you were to go back to 2010, right after the financial crisis, and what would you do differently? What were your major learnings, going into this space?
Really, really good question. I'm honestly not that prepared for. There are a lot of things I would do differently. I would spend more time seeking out other people that work in and around RevOps, sales ops, customer success. I think it's a very fast growing world and role within businesses. I think in the US it's grown very, very quickly and is more mature than in Europe, for example. And I think there are now communities like RevOps Co-op, for example, and there are communities here in Barcelona where I am, and we're going out for drinks on Thursday night, that are invaluable in terms of sharing information and having that like-minded person that you can bounce ideas off. Because revenue operations is a complete mishmash of kind of art and science. You've got to be kind of half hybrid commercial sales and hybrid techie support developer sometimes. And it takes a certain type of mind to be able to understand, all of these things that you're going to do with the tool, how they're going to impact the business in 3 years, for example. So you need somebody with experience, somebody who's made those mistakes that you can bounce off and learn from. So I think going out and educating myself more from people who have been there and done it would be what I would go and do.
Sounds like we have to bring our RevOps meetup to Barcelona soon. Chris, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys. Been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the RevOps Lab podcast. Please consider to like and subscribe our show and give us a 5-star rating on wherever you're listening. If you have feedback or suggestions, let us know at podcast@getweflow.com. We read and reply to every email. Thank you.